a scream in the dark. It was just an ordinary night until everything turned upside down. A horrific crime claimed the life of the girl Isabella, but the question that puzzled everyone: who is the killer? And why? Get ready to discover horrifying secrets. If you are a fan of crime and mystery stories, don't forget to subscribe and activate the bell to receive all the new. Let's get started. In 2008, in the Brazilian city of São Paulo, on the night of March 29th, it was late and the streets were unusually quiet, but the silence was broken by the sounds of ambulances and police. In the middle of a park near a luxury residential complex, people gathered in a state of shock, while a man and a woman held a little girl in their arms, crying bitterly over her. The child had fallen from the 6th floor, and the parents were in shock, screaming her name, Isabella. Wake up! Nothing happened. Let's go back to the beginning of the story to understand what happened. There was a man named Alexander Alves Nardoni, born in 1978, and a girl named Ana Carolina Oliveira, born in 1984. Despite the age difference between them, a romantic relationship developed between them that lasted 3 years until Oliveira graduated from high school. However, during this relationship, Oliveira became pregnant unplanned, which led to the beginning of a series of tragic events. Oliveira was 17 when she discovered her pregnancy, and Alexander was 23. Despite their attempts to live together, Oliveira rejected the idea due to many differences between them, and chose to return to live with her parents to give birth to her daughter Isabella on April 18, 2002. After Isabella was born, Oliveira discovered that Alexander was cheating on her. She broke up with him, and he did not object, but instead married another woman named Ana Carolina Jatoba, who was his classmate at law school. Thus, Oliveira discovered that he was cheating on her during her pregnancy, which she later confirmed. Alexander married Jatoba, and had 2 children with her, while Oliveira continued to raise Isabella alone. The relationship between Alexander and Oliveira was relatively stable in terms of raising the child, as he paid monthly alimony and agreed with Oliveira on visiting times. However, things were not easy for the stepmother, Jatoba, who was jealous of Oliveira. She asked Alexander to completely cut off contact with Oliveira, and became the mediator in all matters related to Isabella, which upset Oliveira, who believed that there were matters that concerned her daughter that she should not interfere in. Despite everything that happened, Ana Carolina Oliveira tried to avoid problems and conflicts with Ana Carolina Jatoba, Alexander's wife. However, after a while, she noticed that Alexander's family, especially his mother, were paying abnormally much attention to Isabella, and did not allow her to be alone during her visits to her father's house. Over time, Oliveira began to notice a change in Isabella's behavior. After each visit, she would return sad, crying and upset, even though she had been a cheerful and lively child. She began to hate going to her father's house, and would call her mother crying, asking her to pick her up early. Her mother wondered in confusion, "Why does my child come back upset? Isn't she supposed to be having fun with her father and siblings?" However, it was not clear what was happening to Isabella at her father's house. On March 29, 2008, Isabella, then 6 years old, went to visit her father Alexander, his wife Jatoba, and her 2 younger brothers. The family decided to have a fun day out. They had lunch outside, then went to the park to play, then to the supermarket to shop, and ended the day with dinner out. They returned to their apartment in the luxury London Tower at around 10:30 p.m. The children were asleep in the car, so Alexander started taking them to the apartment. He carried Isabella to her room, put her on her bed and closed the door behind him, then went back to carry his eldest son while Jatoba carried the younger child. After they finished arranging the shopping bags, they went up to the 6th floor. Alexander entered Isabella's room to check on her, and noticed that the lights in the room were on even though he had turned them off earlier. The biggest surprise was that Isabella was not in her bed, and the window above her bed was open, and the safety net was torn. He rushed to the window and looked down, only to find Isabella lying on the floor motionless. The scene took us back to the beginning, where Alexander was hugging his daughter while crying and shouting, "Open your eyes." The questions began: did Isabella fall by accident? Or did someone push her on purpose? In a state of panic, they called her mother Oliveira. It was Jatoba who spoke to her and told her that Isabella was not breathing. Oliveira initially thought that her daughter had drowned in the pool, and shouted at Jatoba asking her to save her. But Jatoba's response was shocking, as she shouted, "It's all your daughter's fault, she's to blame." Meanwhile, Alexander called his father and friends to tell them what had happened, saying, "I lost my daughter. She's gone." Oliveira rushed to the scene with her father, who was in a state of complete collapse. When she arrived, she refused to let anyone touch her daughter for fear of causing her more pain. She hugged her and whispered to her, "Everything will be okay, you'll get up again." The ambulance crews arrived and tried to revive Isabella for more than 4.5 hours, but she had gone into cardiac arrest. After several attempts, she was pronounced dead. Instead of taking her to the hospital, she was taken directly to the morgue. The police began their investigation, and all those involved in the case were called in for questioning. Alexander and Jatoba gave the same story during the investigation. However, Alexander added a new detail, as he claimed that he saw a thief wearing a black shirt who threw his daughter out the window. He said that when he looked out the window, he saw a man running out of the building. Alexander claimed that the thief might have entered the apartment without making a sound, and that Isabella might have woken up and seen him, so he threw her out so that she would not discover him. Unfortunately, the building guard was wearing a black shirt, so he was immediately arrested as a suspect. Despite Alexander's story about a thief who threw Isabella out the window, the police quickly ruled out this possibility. The forensic teams began to examine the apartment thoroughly, and the results were shocking. When Alexander was asked why he did not resist or pursue the thief after seeing his daughter lying on the ground, he evaded the answer and changed the subject. As the questions were repeated, he continued to repeat the story of the unknown thief. The police's suspicions about Alexander and his wife, Anna Carolina Jatoba, grew, especially after the investigators' observations. When confronted with the fact that the thief, if he existed, would have targeted money or valuables rather than a young child, he was unable to provide any logical explanation. At this point, the police began treating the case as a murder. While examining the apartment, investigators noticed that the doors and windows showed no signs of break-in, making the robbery story illogical. They also noticed bloodstains that had been partially cleaned. Using the chemical luminol, the forensic team was able to detect traces of removed blood, in addition to other bloodstains that had not been completely cleaned. This evidence strengthened the suspicion that what happened was not an accident but a premeditated crime. The forensic report came to confirm the hypothesis of the crime, as it revealed that the injuries Isabella sustained were not the result of falling from the 6th floor. There were signs of beating and strangulation on her body, in addition to signs that she had been dragged by her hair before being thrown out the window. These results proved beyond doubt that the child had been tortured before her death. In the midst of these developments, Isabella's family was drowning in grief, resigned to the idea that what had happened was fate. But they were surprised by a call from the police asking them to come to hear the latest developments in the case. When the family asked why the investigation was still ongoing, the response was shocking. The autopsy results revealed strong suspicion of a crime, and there is a strong possibility that Isabella was intentionally killed. Although the media initially treated the incident as an accidental accident involving a child who fell in her sleep, the situation changed when information leaked that the police suspected the involvement of Alexander and his wife Jatoba. The case became the talk of the town in Brazil, and public opinion began to pressure to know the truth. 2 days after the incident, Alexander and Jatoba were summoned for investigation, but their presence accompanied by lawyers raised suspicions from the police and public opinion, especially since official charges had not yet been brought against them. When confronted with the fact that there were no signs of a break-in and that the guard had an alibi to prove his innocence, Jatoba began to change her story, claiming that she had lost her house keys days earlier, which could have been the reason for an unknown person entering the apartment. But this story appeared fabricated, and increased the suspicions of investigators. The biggest surprise was when Alexander's mother broke down in a public statement, saying, "I am sure that Jatoba killed Isabella. She hated her, and no one else could have done this to a child." This statement shocked everyone, and reinforced the hypothesis that Jatoba was involved in the crime. As evidence and indirect confessions accumulated, the case became one of the most controversial in Brazil. Pressure mounted on the authorities to uncover the truth and bring the perpetrators to justice. As suspicions mounted, the police concluded that Jatoba was the one who threw Isabella out of the window, while her father, Alexander, merely stood by and watched without intervening. However, the police were not satisfied with this hypothesis and decided to deepen the investigations to reach the full truth. After a series of intensive investigations, the police revealed shocking facts that turned the course of the case upside down. Bloodstains belonging to Isabella were found inside Alexander's car, indicating that the child had been beaten inside the car before the crime occurred. Blood was found on her younger brother's diaper, and traces of vomit were found on her father's shirt, suggesting that she had been violently beaten or frightened. In addition, police found clear signs of beating on Isabella's bed under the window, as well as prints of men's shoes that matched the ones Alexander was wearing, indicating that he had climbed onto the bed to throw his daughter out the window. Analysis of Alexander's shirt revealed traces of friction with the window's safety net, indicating that he had stuck his entire body out the window during the crime. Alexander tried to justify this by saying that he had looked out the window to see where his daughter had fallen, but the prosecutor refuted this story, asserting that the pattern of the marks on the shirt proved that he had been holding the child in preparation for throwing her. Although he denied wearing the shirt at the time of the incident, security camera footage from the supermarket showed that Alexander had been wearing the same shirt a few hours before Isabella's death. Investigations revealed that Alexander and Jatoba had changed their clothes and cleaned the apartment of blood after Isabella was thrown out the window. While the child was struggling for her life under the building, the two were busy hiding the evidence and staging the scene to play the sad. Forensic medicine confirmed that Isabella remained alive for half an hour after the fall, suffering from severe injuries and fractures. Investigators conducted a simulation experiment using a dummy matching Isabella's height and weight to see how consistent the injuries were with the scenario of an accidental fall. These experiments proved that the injuries sustained by the child were not the result of a random fall, but rather the result of a direct assault. A decisive testimony emerged when Alexander's neighbor came to the police station and said, "On the day of the incident, I heard a violent quarrel that lasted between 15 and 20 minutes. Then I heard Isabella screaming in fear, 'Daddy, stop. Don't do this.' Her voice was full of terror. After that, I heard a loud fall, but I thought it was a normal family quarrel. I didn't realize the seriousness of the situation until I saw the ambulances and the police." The neighbor added that she decided to testify after following the news about Alexander and his wife's involvement. During the simulation, one of the investigators noticed a blood stain on the outer wall of the building below the window. This discovery made it clear that Isabella was trying to hold on to the window to prevent her from falling, and she was already bleeding before she was pushed. These traces confirmed that the crime was premeditated and not accidental. Based on this overwhelming evidence, the police issued an official arrest warrant for Alexander and his wife Jatoba. They were taken to prison amid widespread public outrage, as people shouted curses and protested the heinous crime. Forensic evidence and testimonies combined to confirm beyond a shadow of a doubt that the little girl Isabella was the victim of a horrific murder planned and carried out by her father and his wife. This was not just a fictional story about an evil stepmother, but a real tragedy that broke everyone's hearts. During her imprisonment, the prisoners noticed strange behavior from Anna Carolina Jatoba, as she was rubbing her shoes in a suspicious manner. This behavior surprised everyone, especially since the shoes were old and worn. This observation prompted the police to confiscate the shoes and send them to the crime laboratory for examination. The results were shocking, as traces of Isabella's blood were found on the shoe. Although Jatoba denied wearing the shoe on the day of the crime, a photo taken on the day of the incident was found showing her wearing the same shoe, which strengthened the evidence against her. The trial of Alexander and his wife, Anna Carolina Jatoba, began on March 22, 2010, 2 years after Isabella's death. During the trial sessions, the prosecutor presented a detailed scenario of the crime, explaining that the dispute between Alexander and his wife was caused by Isabella, as Jatoba was jealous of the child and did not want her in the house. The investigation showed that the fight began in the car, where Isabella was beaten, and the assault continued with beatings and strangulation after she arrived at the apartment. In the end, Alexander carried her to the bedroom, opened the window and threw her from the 6th floor, while the child begged him to stop. After 5 days of trial, Alexander Nardoni and his wife Anna Carolina Jatoba were convicted of the murder of the little girl Isabella, after overwhelming evidence proved their involvement in this brutal crime. Alexander was sentenced to 31 years in prison, while Jatoba was sentenced to 26 years. The verdict was widely welcomed by the public, who saw it as justice being served, and the case was seen as a stern warning against domestic violence. The little girl Isabella remained a symbol of a painful tragedy that shook the entire Brazilian society.